Photoshop. Photoshop. So you'll notice that we have Adobe Photoshop CS6 on these computers. It is not the newest Photoshop software, okay? I apologize for that. I wish we did. But CS6, I believe, was the last Adobe software that you could purchase, so which is why DVC owns it and why they're not going to shell out a bunch of money for a subscription. They will switch eventually, but for now, we have CS6. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything to you. All of the tools are exactly the same. Yes, the newer software may offer a couple new fancier tools, but ultimately all the essentials and all the essentials of Photoshop are the same no matter what version you use. Okay. If you have Adobe CC Photoshop on your home computer or your laptop, I'd recommend when you're saving a Photoshop file that you save down. Actually, I take that back. I think for Photoshop, you don't have to do anything. You can just save it as a Photoshop file. It will open it no matter what version. It is not the same for Illustrator and InDesign, so we'll talk about that when we get to it. But I'm almost positive you can save it as just a good old-fashioned PSD file, and you can open it in any software. Okay. You probably recognize these. Anybody take a picture of those? Those chairs? Yeah. What's funny is I took these 2 semesters ago, and every time I open up Photoshop, it opens up these same photos every single time. Even after I just close them out. Nope, don't care about it. Nope, don't care about it. Nope, don't care about it. And then when I open it up next class, they will all pop up. Don't know why. Okay, so let me just open up the first file. I'm just going to open up a random image, okay, and then we'll go ahead and just kind of go through the layout of the program. Making sure I'm recording. All right, so let's go to open. Let me go to my thumb drive and find a good file. Let's try this one first. Oops. Okay, so here's my first image, just an image of some ocean, all right? But before we talk about the image, before we talk about our first tool that we're going to learn, let's talk about kind of the basics and the layout of Photoshop. How many people here have used Photoshop in the past or have maybe some limited Photoshop experience? Good. So I think it sounds like a lot of people here have maybe dabbled in it a little bit. Anybody here super good at Photoshop and might show me up a little bit later in the class? Good. I always like that one person. There's always one person that's like, I know another good way. That's okay. I'm always open to learning new things myself if I don't know them already. So let's just kind of go over the layout. All right. So like all of the Adobe software, you're going to have this ribbon on the left-hand side that has a majority of our tools. Okay. There are a lot more tools than just this. We'll talk about where some of those are later. You also have a toolbar at the top portion of our screen, okay? Like every software, you're gonna have your typical file, your edit, where you can save and open all your files, import, export, print, etc. We're all fairly familiar with that. And then a lot of what you see over here under image, layer, type, select, a lot of these tools can also be found over here on our vertical toolbar, but they're just found in a different way. I'm not going to go into big detail in every tool that is in here. I'll bring them up as we start to learn them. But I would suggest when you guys start, just to kind of mosey through them a little bit and read what some of the tools in there are. One that you'll probably definitely run into throughout the future is this window tool. If you're ever missing something, if you ever accidentally close a toolbar and it disappears, don't panic. It can always be found under here under window. So for example, you can see my 5 different windows that I have open. So if I uncheck adjustments, all of my adjustments toolbar over here will go away. All right, so I'll bring that back up. So that pops back up, that's this toolbar, and so on and so forth. So every one of these little segments that you see is represented by one of the toolbars in this window. Okay, so you can activate all of your toolbars using these. So really we only have like 5 of like 25 toolbars activated when you open up Photoshop. But these are the essentials. That's mostly what we'll be learning about for this class. Okay. When you're looking at the toolbar on the left-hand side, you'll notice that a majority of the tools have a little arrow down in the bottom right-hand corner. That means that if you click and hold down on that tool, it will usually expand. Well, if there's an arrow, it will always expand into a variety of more tools, okay, that are kind of subgroupings of each other, okay? They all are very similar, but work in, some slightly different ways, all right? So we have the Lasso Tool. We'll be using that not next class, but the following, once we get into methods and techniques of selecting items inside of a photograph, okay? So those are all used for segmenting and selecting images or portions of your photograph. We also have the crop tool, okay? We'll talk about that in just a second. That's kind of our most basic editing tool that we'll learn about. We have the eyedropper tool that is used for selecting colors in our images. For example, if I click on my blue sky, it actually tells me exactly what that color is. One of the problems with that is that it's really hard to know what it is that you're selecting. Remember when we talked about pixels? There they are. So that's an actual pixel from your image. And you can see how many there really are. So you could actually edit an individual pixel. So that's just kind of the makings of a raster image. We have the paintbrush tool, we have the clone stamp tool. All of these will have a specific lecture about, so don't panic if I'm just rolling through these tools really quick. I'm just kind of showing you where they are for now, okay? The eraser tool. Today we're going to learn about dodge and burn, which is this tool right here, one of my favorite tools in Photoshop. We have the text tool if you want to place some text on your image, okay? So maybe you want to say, image 1, dodge and burn. I know you can't see it, but I could select that. I could change it to much larger, change my color, what have you, okay? So that's going to be our text tool. That works just like every other text tool that you've probably used. One other thing I want you guys to keep in mind, when you guys are opening up your images, remember we talked about image size a couple classes ago, just be aware of the image size that you're working with, okay? If you go up to image and you go to image size, you'll notice that although my pixels per square inch is only 72, which is why my image is so large, but also the file size is not too crazy right now, but I don't need a 46-inch wide image, okay? It's not gonna help me in this class unless you have plans to print them out really large. So right now I know my file size for this image is only about 4 or 5 megs. So I'm not gonna change it, but if you notice that your file size is really, really big, easy way to fix that is just by changing the document size, okay? So I mean, I could change this to 20 inches and it's still gonna be 20 by 15, okay? I'm still only zoomed in 18%, so if I go up to like 50, it's gonna look exactly the same as what we saw earlier. So, and now that image will be half the size of what it is. So if I do Control S and I save it, it's now down to 1.4 megabytes versus the 5 that it originally was, okay? I'm not gonna do that yet because I haven't done anything to it.
You can
Yes?
also, when you go to save it and have the quality, it's not at 12, it's at 10, it cuts down your storage.
Exactly. So when you're saving as a JPEG, it actually gives you a little slider of the scale or the size of the image that you want. So if you bring it up to a 12, that's the highest quality JPEG. You can bring it down to a 10, 8, 6, but that all has something to do with the quality of the image. So be aware of what's happening when you're,
Size of file.
yeah, when you're reducing that. It will reduce the quality of your image. Okay, continuing. So we have the text tool. We have our path selection tool. We have rectangles. We also have circles, ellipses, all of our different shapes, okay, can be found here. We also have a color wheel over here, okay? These two colors represent colors that, let's say I was to make a shape. Let me just pull up in one of my, actually, let me come back to that in just a little bit. I can get into that in a lot more detail. Okay, notice that you will these two color swatches. You'll notice the same swatches up here on the left. What these represent, the blue represents the body of a object that you might make. So let's say I make a square. The body of that square would be blue, and the border would be white. Okay, so that's what that's referring to, and that would actually be the same whether or not you're using InDesign or Illustrator as well. You'll notice a lot of similarities in terms of how these programs are set up. Okay, below our color palette, you'll notice a variety of different adjustments. This is where we're going to be spending all of our time today, is learning these different adjustment techniques. Okay, and part of what makes Photoshop so special is the ability to work in layers. So we learned earlier in the lecture that Photoshop is a non-destructive editing tool, meaning that I can always turn my layers on and off and revert back to my original image at any given time. Okay, because a part of the Photoshop experiencing, or part of the Photoshop editing experience, is somewhat a little bit experimentational. You're not always going to know exactly what to do. You might have an idea. The goal of teaching you these tools is that when you look at an image, you can kind of break it down and say, yes, I want the whites to pop a little bit more, or my shadows are really dull, so I'm then going to use this tool, okay? Versus just kind of picking a random tool and making the colors pop, brighten the contrast, and picking some random adjustments. That's not the goal. We want to have a reason for the adjustments that we're picking, so we're actually selecting them for a purpose. It's very easy to just click on a filter on your phone and it just does a couple things, and you click on 5 or 6 and you get one that looks cool. That's not the objective. We're supposed to have a reason to why it is that we're making the decisions we're making. Okay, so this is going to be our layers right here. And so as we start working on our different adjustments today, you'll notice how those start to fill in our layers palette. Any questions on that? I know that's a lot of information in just a second. You could talk about how this is laid out, probably the entire class if we wanted to. But I'd highly recommend just kind of exploring those different tools a little bit, clicking on them, seeing what they do. We will talk about a lot of them over the next few days, but definitely just dive right in and start to experiment when you can. Okay? So the first tool we're going to learn about today is making an image black and white. Okay? As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot more to a black and white image than just clicking black and white. Okay? And that actually is a tool. You can go up to image and adjustments, and you could go over and just click on black and white, okay? And then there you can make a few little adjustments, and then you hit OK, and then you have now actually permanently made that image black and white. Well, there's another way that we can do this where we can have a lot more options in terms of how we edit the black and white image. So I'm going to do Control Z. Control Z will always back you up inside Photoshop, so it'll take you back to what you previously had. It will only do that once though, so you can't just keep hitting Control Z, Control Z, Control Z and going back multiple steps. But if you hit Control Alt Z, that will allow you to go back more than one. Why they do that, I don't really know. Just about every other software you use, you can hit it as many times as you want. But Control Z brings you back, Control Alt Z brings you back more than once. Before we look at the black and white, let's talk about zooming in and out. If you hold down Alt, you can move your little wheel on your mouse up and down, and that will allow you to zoom in and out. The center of your zoom will always be where your cursor is. So if I want to zoom in on this boat, I can put my cursor on that and I could zoom in on that boat. Okay. Another way to zoom in and out is holding down Control and hitting the plus and minus button on your keyboard. Okay. So like most software, there's usually multiple ways to get to the end result. I'm hoping to teach you or lead you more into the correct ways. Okay? All right, so back to black and white. So the first thing that we're going to do before we make it black and white is we're going to go up to image. We're going to go up to layer, and we are going to click on new adjustment layer. Okay? So what that does is it allows for each of these adjustments. When I say each of these adjustments, I'm meaning all 10 or 12 or however many there are right there, to be able to turn them on and off. Okay, all of these adjustments here are the same as what you see right here. The difference between the two, though, is the ability to turn them off, okay? So if you go over here and just click on one of these, all right? Actually, I take that back, sorry. This will actually do the same thing as going up to new layer, new adjustment layer. Those two are the same thing, but if you go over to edit, image and adjustments, you will not get a layer for these adjustments. These adjustments are the same thing as what you see on the right, but it will not create a layer to where you can turn it on and off. As soon as you create it, it's embedded into the photo, okay? So I would always recommend creating an adjustment layer first. Let me delete that. So to go ahead and make this black and white, we're gonna go up to layer, we're gonna go over to new adjustment layer, and then we're gonna go down to channel mixer, okay? So we're gonna click on channel mixer, and I'm gonna go ahead and call this layer black. Actually, I'm gonna call this monochrome, just another way of saying black and white, all right? So I'm gonna name it. It's important to stay organized in Photoshop. Today we might only have 5 or 6 layers, but when we actually start to mask images and bring, portions of other images back and forth, I have renderings in my office that I have 1,000 layers in. Okay, so it's important to stay organized, name your layers as you need to, and keep organized. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. All right, and then we're going to get this little properties dialog box for the channel mixer tool. All right, from there, I'm going to click on monochrome. So when I click on monochrome, that will make my image black and white, okay? So by just clicking monochrome, that's what the same tool that we did earlier did by itself. The difference between the two is that we still have the ability to adjust the RGB of the image. Well, you might be thinking, it's black and white now, how would you be adjusting the RGB? Well, there are still red, green, and blue tones inside of that image, okay? So what I want you to experiment with today is going up to the different presets that are already built into the program, okay? So you might click on default, which is actually what we just had. That's how you bring it back to non-monochrome, or you can just uncheck this. But if you go over to, let's say, for example, black and white infrared, you'll notice that the result of that black and white image is a lot different than what we originally had, okay? Let me make this a little bit smaller. You'll notice that my sky is a lot more washed out now. I wouldn't say this is not really the preset that I ideally want. But let's try the blue filter. So the blue filter actually works pretty well. I can actually get the highlights and the shadow, and I can actually see some depth to my waves. That kind of makes sense because there's actually a lot of blues inside of my image, okay? But let's keep going down. Then we have the green filter. Also a very different effect. There are pros and cons to whatever preset you might choose, okay? But experiment between a few of those. Some will work really well, some won't, all right? So notice that by selecting green, it actually adjusts these sliders. All these presets are kind of are different sliding adjustments that people have already figured out that work well, okay? So they're presets. Instead of you just playing around with the sliders and trying to find the optimal setting, there are presets that will automatically take you to some of those optimal settings, okay? So look at a few more of those. That's actually probably my favorite of the two. I still have really nice color variation in my sky. I can see the variation between the lighter parts and the darker parts, and I actually get some really nice depth to my waves. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep that. That's what I'm gonna pick for this black and white image, okay? So that's black and white. So if we go over here to our layers property, notice that I now have a layer called monochrome, all right? So that's the layer that we just created. If I wanna turn it off, all you're gonna do is check on the little eye, okay? I now have my original image. So if I uncheck that, I'm back to what I originally had. So the nice part about this is you can apply a dozen different layers to it. You can see how they work together. You might drop multiple layers on top of each other to get a specific effect. Or if you want just one, you have that ability, okay? If you want to go back and maybe you want to adjust one of the presets, or you want to mess with those little sliders just a little bit more, you can just double click on this little channel mixer icon, And that will bring you back into the little properties palette that we had before. Okay? So that's going to be our first, that's Photoshop 1.1. All right, so our first adjustment that we'll make, turning an image to black and white. Next, we're going to look at levels, okay? Let's look at levels. So I'm going to go ahead and close that down. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to revert back to my original image. Another thing to keep in mind when you are using these different adjustments is not every adjustment will work really well for every image. You might notice that, for example, this image, and I'll actually bet that this image won't work fantastic for all of the adjustments. The reasons being is that a lot of my whites in my image are already really white, and a lot of what we're learning today is accentuating the whites and the darks. So just looking at the color from this image already, it's already pretty good. So you'll notice that some adjustments work really well and some don't. So you'll figure that out on your own as you go through them. All right, so let's see. We're doing levels, so we're gonna same thing. We're gonna go up to image. I'm sorry, layer. We're gonna go to new adjustment layer, and we're gonna go down to levels. All right, we'll go ahead and call this levels is fine. That will work. We'll hit OK. And notice that we have this little graph here. Okay, so what this graph represents is it's kind of a breakdown of the variety of different pixels in the image. Okay, so you have dark pixels represented by this little slider on the left-hand side, and we have white pixels on the right-hand side. All right. So as you can see in the image, there are much more white and lighter colored pixels in this image. So there's a huge influx of those tones on this graph. Okay. If you take a picture at nighttime where a lot of the image is really dark, you'll notice that it's very much the other way. So what do you do with this graph is probably the first thing. To most people, this probably it's like looking at an alien. It's like, what does this mean? Well, to get a nice proper adjustment, what you usually do, and let me draw this on the board, is the first step you're going to do is analyze the graph. Okay? So what I have here is I have a graph that looks kind of like this. Okay? So what I usually do to adjust that graph is, right now, I'm actually not going to adjust my white at all because there's already a huge peak. But what I usually do is I slide my toggle over to the area on the graph where you start to get that initial steep incline. So I'm going to bring that dark little toggle, and I'm going to bring it over to about this location. Okay? And we'll notice what that does. Initially, it's probably going to do little to nothing. Okay? So nothing, 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 nothing. But as I get right up to about here, right where that graph starts to kind of lift off, you'll notice that all of my dark pigments in my graph, or I'm sorry, in my image, really start to pop. So you get a really nice shadow line, and you get some really nice differentiation in the colors in the graph. Now, I'm not going to change the white because it's already sitting right at the peak. Okay, but we'll find another image in just a second where that's not the case. A lot of the times you're going to see a graph that looks something like this, where it'll be kind of steady, and then it'll go up, and it'll kind of do that. So, and you'll have your white bar over here, your black bar over here, and you're going to move them both in some small fashion. But as I mentioned before I even clicked on curves, I didn't think I was going to have to make much adjustments to the white because the whites were already so prevalent in the image. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. I'm okay with that. Maybe just a slightly too dark. Let me bring it back just a tiny bit. Okay, but otherwise I'm good with that. That image looks really nice. Now let's look at the difference between the before. There's the before and the after. Okay, so you can actually see we're getting a lot of the dark tones in this wave are actually really popping out now that we're doing that. Okay, let's try that on one of my other images just really quickly so you can see another example. Let's try this one. I think this will work good. Okay, so here's an image of Yosemite. All right, so I'm going to go over to Image, Adjustments, and curves. Oh, sorry, not curves, levels. So new adjustment layer, levels, okay. And notice that we have a very different effect. We actually have a moderate amount of gray tones, and we actually have a fairly even distribution of black and white tone. But what I might do is, kind of like in the last photo, I didn't really have to slide my white very much. This is kind of a little bit of the opposite, whereas I don't need to slide my darks, but I'm going to slide it over just a little bit, just because I can see that tiny little kind of increase right there. So I'm going to get just a little bit more pop out of my darks, and I actually have a little room to make my whites go up. Okay, so about like that. So let's look at the before and after. Okay, so you can see it's a little dull, a little gray, and now I'm accentuating the whites and the lighter colors inside the rocks, while leaving a majority of the greens and the shadows relatively the same. I didn't really adjust those much at all. Okay, so as we go through these different techniques, also start to think about how you might stack them on top of each other. So each of these tools might do something really nice by themselves, but ultimately you're going to get the best effects combining them together. I'm going to be giving out next class. I'm going to go ahead and give out assignment number 1. Remember, assignments are more of the all-encompassing of the exercises. You give you about a week to 2 weeks to work on them. But what you're going to do is you're going to create your best photo. So you're going to pick a photo that you've taken and apply whatever adjustments you feel are necessary to make it the best photograph. Okay? More about that later though. So that's going to be levels. So that's tool 2 of 5 that we're going to learn today. Let's see. Number 3, I believe, is curves. Okay, we're going to look at how to use the curves tool. I'm going to go back to my original image here. I'm going to turn off levels, and let's look at curves. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then go to Curves. Delete that and hit OK. So here we have another graph. Again, notice that the graph in the background, which is actually called a histogram, the graph in the background is very similar to our graph when we did the previous, when we did levels. Okay, so the graph is very similar. So what does this mean? All right, let's go ahead and draw another cool picture. This little board here. So we have this graph. It looks like this. Okay, and right now there's a line that goes from one corner to the next. And what this represents is your lighter tones up here and your darker tones down here. So let's see how we might adjust that. Okay, so I'm going to click one time in the middle of my graph. Okay, notice that as I bring this little toggle up, the image starts to get lighter. Okay, if I bring it down, it gets darker. So that's kind of the basic explanation of between lighter or darker. So we can take this a step further though. Okay, if I bring that dot down versus bringing it up, kind of what's the difference between the two? Okay, the difference between the two is that as you bring it down, you're gonna adjust the lighter tones to be, I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to actually explain this little part, but you're only adjusting just the lighter tones of the image, but you're actually making them even lighter. So you have the option to you have the option to adjust the lightness and the darkness between lights and darks. Okay, so you're breaking it down even a step further than just light and dark. It's the light and darks of light and dark. Okay, so that's what that means. So let me delete this and let me start all over, and we'll talk about how to properly make that adjustment using curves. Okay, so let me delete this and let me create a nice fresh one. Layer, new adjustment layer, curves. It's one of those tools that it's a little bit easier to demonstrate than it is to necessarily explain how it works. So what we're going to do is I'm going to select a dot in the middle of my graph. Okay, I'm going to keep that in the middle as close as I can, And then I'm going to make a dot up here on the top and up here on the bottom. And those are roughly about in the middle of our initial dot that we created, okay? So what we're gonna do first is we're going to adjust our lights by going up to the top, and I can now adjust, my darks. Notice that as I bring it up, my darks get really washed out, and as I bring them down, the darks get really dark and mutated. Ideally, the proper adjustment for a curves layer is a nice subtle S. Okay, so what you want is actually something like this. So you'd have your middle dot that is not moving at all. You might have something kind of like that. So your curve is a nice gentle sweeping S. Now how much that or how gentle that is up to you. Every photograph is going to be a little bit different. It might be so subtle that you can barely even see it. It also might be, a lot larger. It depends on how much distortion there already is in the photograph. To have something like that, it would have to be a really poorly taken photograph in the first place. But you will have that in some instances. You may also have instances where it could be the opposite. So you're not going up like that. You may actually start going down and go in something kind of like that. Okay? So depending on your photograph, every photograph is different. You'll have to kind of experiment with what you want. Okay? And so looking at his screen right now, you can actually make some pretty wild things depending on how you adjust that. So for example, let's see. Yeah, you can make a very negative photograph. You can see how that graph gets pretty wild if you're trying to see some interesting colors, but that's not typically what the tool is used for. Okay, so you're going to learn to practice those S curves and practice the different adjustments for that tool. Okay, any questions about any of the first three that we've talked about? Good. How do you save it? Okay, let's talk about saving real quick. So I'm going to bring my curves tool back over. I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Save As. Okay. So when I'm all done, you probably want to do a Save As and save it as a Photoshop file right away, so that every time you save it, it automatically saves it as a Photoshop file. So I'm going to say Ocean Photo 1, and I'm going to hit save, and that's going to be my Photoshop file. But before you do the Photoshop file, you're going to need to create individual files for each of the adjustments that you've made. Okay, so going back to our first one, let's turn the monochrome back on, and you can either do this one at a time as you complete them, or if you want to do them all at the very end, you can do that as well. So I'm going to turn on the monochrome adjustment, and I'm going to go to File, Save As. I'm going to change this to a JPEG, okay, and I'm going to call this maybe Ocean Photo, Ocean Photo 1, black and white, okay, and I'm going to hit save, and then it gives me the option of the image quality. So right now at an 8, which is considered high, it's only 294K. That's still, if I bring it all the way up to 12, it's not even a meg. So that's fine. I'm not worried about that. What I want to avoid is like 40 megabyte files, because when you send me 16 of them, it's going to be a pretty large, mega file. Okay, so if you can do it maximum quality and the file size is still pretty respectable, great. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and I now have a save of my black and white image. Yes.
So we don't worry about the format in the second half of that window that was there.
File. Let's look at it. So for JPEG, or down here? JPEG. So let's look at JPEG real quickly. No, I've never adjusted any of this. Oh, one more step.
Yeah, your compression option.
Okay, so no, I don't ever change this. In fact, I'm not 100% positive what the difference between standard and optimized is. Let me just look. Standard is actually a higher. I think I know the answer to this, but let me come back to you. I don't want to give you the wrong information. I think optimize it's saying that it's the highest quality without necessarily, it's a lower quality than the highest setting, but it's not necessarily reducing the quality of the image, if that makes sense. So, but I'll come back to that. Let me actually look into that a little bit more. I've never had to change it, or I've never thought about changing it.
If you're saving an adjusted image, do you need to? I just turned off my main image and it went to like a PNG background.
Okay, so turn that back on.
I like it. I just turned it off. It's so big. It's gonna
Okay, let me come back and look at it in just a few minutes, just so I can.
there.
Did you get it?
Because you took off your background layer.
Oh, so that's the background layer. So the first layer you open is going to be your background layer. Okay, so if you actually turn that off, you're just gonna have a white canvas in the background. Okay. All right, so let's go on to our fourth adjustment today, and that's gonna be how to make an image pop. And if you go back to our lecture, more specifically, we're gonna look at sorry, I just had a brain fart here. Let me actually pull up a slide so you can actually see a visual example of what this is going to look like. Almost there. Okay, so when I say make an image pop, what I'm more specifically talking about is learning to adjust the saturation and the vibrance of an image. Okay, so it kind of means multiple things, so we kind of use the general expression of just making it pop. But how you make it pop is ultimately up to you. So how do we do that? So I'm going to again go up to layer, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new adjustment layer. And I am going to go over to channel mixer again. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on, we'll just call this pop. Okay, I'm going to hit OK. And we're going to get something that looks kind of like this. Let me revert this back to, or let me turn off my black and white. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to learn to adjust the different output channels. So we're going to look at red, green, and blue, and we're going to go ahead and make adjustments accordingly in the channel mixer to help make an image pop. And to do that, actually, let me open up an image that has both cool tones, and I'm going to open up an image that has warm tones. And let's see how this affects both. Give me just 1 second. Let me open up my sunset photo here. Okay, so here's a good example. This is already a pretty rich photograph, okay? Ideally, if I had a perfect one, it would be maybe about 30 minutes earlier before this got too crazy. This is actually a sunset. This is no Photoshop has been done to this at all. But let's look at the difference between doing it to our first photo and our next. So again, I'm going to go up to pop. Let's turn that back on. And to start to make the image pop, the first thing that I'm going to do is let's start with red. I'm going to go ahead and do the same adjustment to both the red, green, and the blue channel. Okay. What I like to do, or when you're making these adjustments, what you want to keep in mind is that you want these three numbers to always add up to 100. Okay. That keeps the color balance proportionate, okay? It makes it so that it's somewhat even. It allows us to accentuate, yeah, not like that. It allows us to accentuate a certain channel, but also properly balance it by adjusting our other channels as well. So if I'm going to adjust the reds in my image, so you're probably actually not going to see a lot happen initially to this first stage, I'm going to bring this up to say 100 and we'll say 118, 120. It's kind of like my magic number that I use quite a bit. So let me try 118. Well, notice that when I did that, you can't really see it on the projector, but on my screen it actually very much has like a red tint to it. Okay, that's not necessarily what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to green, and I'm going to do -9, and I'm going to go to blue and do -9. So now, looking at my screen, if you're doing this right now on your own screens, you'll notice how it's actually creating an effect. That actually balances out the different channels. Okay, so I'm going to do that exact same process to all three. Now, I'm not saying 118 or 120 is always the magic number, depending on how much saturation or how much vibrance you want. You may adjust that little or less or more, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and go to green. I'm gonna do the same exact thing. I'm gonna say 118. I now have a nice, very blue filter on my screen, or I'm sorry, very green. So my waves are very green. My sky is kind of a greeny blue. But I'm gonna go over to my red channel, do -9, -9, and that's looking a little bit better. Okay, so lastly, I'm gonna go down to blue. This is where I'm gonna notice the most change because I have a lot of blue in my photo. Okay, so I'm gonna go to 118 again, and then -9 and -9. Okay, so remember the key is that whatever you adjust, whatever channel you adjust, make sure that they all add up to 0. Okay, that will keep the image balanced.
0 or 100?
You want them to add up to 100. Did I say 0? Okay, you want it to add up to 100. I don't know if you'd be able to get it to 0. I don't know what would actually happen. I don't think it would look good. But now I've made that same adjustment to all 3 of my channels. Okay, so right now I've completed that adjustment for this image. Okay, so let's go back, and it probably doesn't look a lot different, but let's look at the before and the after. Okay, so you can't see much on the screen. I can see it a lot more on my screen, but I can see much richer greens and blues in my waves, which is what we're looking at. We're looking at an image that has a lot of water in it, so we have a lot of blues and a lot of greens. So what we just performed here would be what of the two? Do we adjust the vibrance or the saturation? Vibrance, right. We adjusted the cooler colors. Now I could adjust the saturation on it if I wanted to, but it wouldn't look right because the whole image is composed of much cooler colors. Okay, so let's try the same thing to the sunset photo. Let's see. So layer, new adjustment layer, and we're going to go over to. What am I going to go to? Channel mixer. Yeah, I heard a few whispers out there. So channel mixer. Said okay, and let's make those same adjustments. So we're not going to notice a lot of effect for adjusting the blue channel. Let's try. Whoops, not that. 120. Wow, that's actually kind of crazy. All right, so 120. And actually, that actually doesn't look bad at all. Kind of embellishing those blues actually really has a big fluctuation in the sky, where it's really orange and yellow over here, but it actually gets to almost blue back over on this side. But let's continue. So we have -10, -10. Okay, so that adds up to 0. So that's going to be my blue channel. Let's do the same thing to green. No, you want them to add up to 100. So 120 -10 -10 would be 100. Okay.
What if one is over?
I mean, it's not gonna, the software is not gonna break or anything, but you'll start to oversaturate or over vibrance an image. Okay, so you'll start to get instances where the reds are just too much, or the blues are too much, or the greens. Okay, so you can try it. Maybe if that's ultimately what you're after, then try it. So it's not wrong if they don't add up to 100, but ideally, to keep the colors in the image balanced, you want them to add up to 100.
Do all 3 have to be the same? So you're switching between the red, green, and blue, and you're doing the same thing?
No,
You're doing 120, you don't-
not necessarily. So, for example, if I'm adjusting the saturation, so I want to put more emphasis on the red tones, then I can over embellish the reds a little bit more. So for this image, I might want to do that because if I'm trying to highlight the colors of the sunset, okay? So you could also do the greens and blues a little bit less. So you just have to play with that a little bit. So that's green, and then let's go to red, and let's try like 130 because this is a sunset photo. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so pretty wild. Looks good. I could see a few areas where it's probably a little oversaturated, like right here in these leaves. It's starting to just be a little bit too much, so I could reduce that a little bit. Maybe it wants to be at 120. Okay, I'm looking at the yellow behind the leaves, and you may not be able to adjust this too much. Actually, the leaves themselves were getting just a little bit too red. I didn't want to over embellish it too much. But again, it ultimately is what you're looking for. So let's see the difference between that's the before and that's the after. So you can see the difference between the two images is that we're getting much more pop in the warmer tones in this particular image versus the cooler tones from the ocean photo. So saturation versus vibrance. Any questions on that one? All right. Moving on, last one. So the last one we're going to talk about is, just refresh my memory, is dodging and burning, okay? So what we use dodge and burn for, if you just had to guess, burning might be to do what? If you're going to burn it, what happens to something when you burn it? It usually turns black, okay, so it usually chars it, okay, so that's kind of what you're doing. It's almost, has anyone ever, I'm sure you probably have you taken a piece of paper and just kind of maybe hovered a flame below it just a little bit, okay, or that paper starts to just kind of char a little bit, it gets a little black, okay, so that's actually exactly what you're doing in the image. So the burn tool is going to darken specific areas. So you actually have control of what's darkening and what's lightening by using this tool versus our previous 4 tools where it did it to the entire image. Now, in a couple, or actually not next lecture, but the following lecture, we're going to learn how to make these adjustments to specific areas. We'll learn how to select portions of the image and only do adjustments to specific parts. Because as you look at images and as you get better at photography, you'll realize that the entire part of an image doesn't necessarily need the same adjustment. You might notice that the foreground really wants to be lightened, but the background wants the opposite. So you'll have that ability eventually when we learn more about the selection tools. But let's look at dodge and burn. So I am going to, let's use a different photo. Let me see what my other one I have is. DVC. All right, let's open this one. This is one you'll all be familiar with. If it opens. So the nice thing about this image right here, notice that it says camera raw Nikon D40. This was shot with my actual camera. I shot this just a couple days ago when we were all walking around. So this was shot under a raw file setting. If you guys are out taking photos, your camera probably has the option to have JPEGs or probably a variety of different image options. If you shoot in RAW, you will always have the most ability to make adjustments later on down the road. It's the most editable file type. Okay, so this is telling me that I have a RAW file. I'm just gonna go ahead and open that, and I can now start to make my adjustments. So you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of your adjustments. You'll get a little bit more variation in your color when you use RAW. Whether or not it's actually noticeable by the naked eye, maybe not, but your adjustments will be a little bit better if you can shoot in RAW. Okay, so moving forward, let's look at the dodge and burn tool. So to start that, we're going to go up to layer, and instead of new adjustment layer, we're actually just going to go up and select just the basic layers. We're just going to create just a regular old layer. Let's call this dodge and burn. All right, and then below that, under mode, we're going to change that to overlay. All right, so overlay is the next step. So we name it dodge and burn, change that to overlay, and then we're going to click on the box that says fill with an overlay neutral color 50% gray. Okay, so those are the 3 steps we're going to do before we hit OK, and we're going to get this box. So unlike our previous adjustment layers, there's not a dialog box that opens up with this. So it's still going to work the same way in that we can turn the layer on and off, but there's not a properties dialog box associated with this layer. Okay, so we're going to go down to our tool or our little tool chest over here, and we're going to click on the one that looks like a lollipop. The lollipop is going to be the dodge tool. The dodge tool will selectively make areas lighter, and then our burn tool will make areas darker. So let's start with the burn tool. Okay, notice that my cursor has a very small circle on it right now. That little circle represents the area that will be affected once I click down. So once I click down and I hold that, it will start to make that area darker. Okay, if I want that circle to be bigger, I can come up here to this little arrow and I can make that bigger. So it's basically the size of your brush stroke. Okay, if I want to affect a larger area at one time, I can make that circle much larger. Okay, notice how it's getting bigger and bigger. So depending on how much you're trying to fine tune an image, you might make that smaller or larger. Okay, if you're really trying to accentuate the shadows like under a person's arm or something, you might want a really small brush so you could really get in there and make that area darker. Okay, but for larger adjustments, you might want it a lot bigger. Okay, below size, you have a button called hardness. Okay, now just to kind of how do you describe that? Well, look at this little image over here on the left, right here, and this image here on the right. This example right here would be at 0 hardness, I believe. Actually, let me just do a quick test. Sometimes I have to refresh my memory on that one. Let's see. Let me grab my eraser tool. It works the same way. It has the same tools. Let me go nice and big. Okay, so if we're at 100% hardness, oops. Okay, so when you're at 100% hardness, notice that the edge of that brush, when I click down, it's a perfect crisp line all the way around. Okay, so if I change that to the opposite, I'm going to change that to, let's say, 50%. Okay, and I click down. Notice that the gradient of that edge starts to, reduce itself. Okay, so you will come into different times where you don't necessarily want to have a really hard effect on that image. You want it to be really gradual and subtle. So you might reduce the hardness of the brush. If you're adding a shadow, we all know that shadow lines don't. There's not a crisp cutoff of where that shadow is, where there's shadow and there's not. It's gradual. So you might use your different brush settings to adjust that, okay? And if we make that 0, it's even more, okay? So you can really get that really nice gradient in what it is that you're working on, okay? So let me back that up, and let's go back to our dodge and burn tool. Let's go back even further. Okay, so I'm gonna click on dodge and burn. Make sure that I'm on my dodge and burn layer. Okay, and then I am going to go back to burn. Okay, this looks pretty good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for areas in my image that I might want to embellish the shadows a little bit. So are there areas that are too light that maybe I want to darken, or are there maybe some shadows that I specifically want to kind of make them pop? Okay, maybe I don't want all of my shadows to pop. If you wanted that to happen, you can adjust the shadows, or you could use our levels or one of our other tools that we learned today. But if you only want to do specifically one area, maybe it's underneath this this bridge. I can then start to go through and kind of click on that. Okay, and you can either tap your mouse or you can hold it down. But if you hold down your mouse, it's a little bit harder to control. I like to kind of tap it a little bit. Okay, so and I can keep doing that until I ultimately get the effect that I'm looking for. Okay, maybe I want to embellish, the shadows in the tree a little bit. Maybe down here in the bush. If I zoom in, maybe I want to darken the shadows on the edges of this bench. There's not always kind of a correct method of doing this. Ultimately, you're going to have to determine what that might be. Okay, so you can kind of see how that's working. And notice that on this little thumbnail right here in my layers palette, notice these little speckles. Notice you can see a little bit of black right there. You can actually see where you're clicking. Okay, so it gives you a little thumbnail of the dark and light areas that you're adjusting. Okay, so this is a really good tool for like accentuating shadows and maybe small areas. Maybe it's back over here. Okay, so that's going to be the burn tool. Now let's do the same thing, but we're going to change this to burn. All right, and here I'm going to lighten some other areas. So maybe it's this right here. Whoops, did I not change it? Didn't change it. So let's go to the dodge tool. That's going to go ahead and lighten specific areas. Okay, and maybe I want to lighten and kind of make this glass pop just a little bit more. I want to see the turquoise in that glass. Okay, so you can kind of see how I'm doing that. I'm lightening it up. I'm bringing out the whites in the image that I'm selecting. Okay, maybe there's certain parts of the tree that you want to kind of highlight the top of the tree where the sun is hitting it. Okay, so lots of ways you could use this tool. How you use it is up to you, but that's what that's going to do. Does everyone understand how that works? Okay, so it allows you to specifically target areas in your photo and make them either lighter or darker.
Is that tool smart enough to like the cursor overlap a vertical line and it didn't light?
Great question. No, it's not. So, and eventually, I think it's next class, we're going to learn selection tools to where you might actually just, I'll do one really quickly. One that I like to use a lot is the magic wand tool, where it's actually smart enough, sorry, when you use it, make sure you select your photograph, otherwise it doesn't know what to select. But now that I have my photograph selected, I can actually select an area, okay? And then now I could click on my dodge and burn layer and I could start to, let's see, where'd it go? So dodge, I can make this as big as I want, but it's only gonna lighten the area that's selected. So there's about 5 or 6 different tools that we'll learn on how to select that. Not all things are as easy as a rectangle. You know, you have things like trees that are really loose and non-rigid that can become really hard to select, but we'll talk about different techniques that we might use to do that. So do the best you can with, you know, if you want to kind of dabble with some of the selection tools a little bit, by all means do so. But you're not required to do that. You'll get some nice results without doing that right now. Okay? So those are our 5 tools. So again, you're going to pick 3 images and you're going to perform those 5 techniques on all 3 images. Your deliverables would be a composition of all 18 images. Okay? So you're going to be sending me 18 images, an original, and 5 edits of each. And ideally, you'll label those so I know what they are.
If we put the label on each layer, when we save it, will it overwrite the other ones?
So what you could do if you want to actually label it in Photoshop, what you might do is do this. So let's say I'm going to do 1. So depending on the size of the photograph will ultimately determine the size of the text, but I might do something like this. Let's see. It's probably too big. Let's try 50. Okay, so I'm going to type in dodge and burn. Okay, and just like all of your other layers, that becomes, or I'm sorry, just like all our other adjustments, that becomes a layer itself. So if you wanted to actually label it in Photoshop, you could do that. Keep it nice and simple. Okay, then you wouldn't have to go put it into Word, but it says dodge and burn, and then I would save that and I would turn it off and I would just create another one for black and white, for levels, for curves. Okay, an easy way to do that is just duplicating the layer. So okay, I can now turn that on. It's in the exact same place. If I double click on the T, that will allow me to adjust my text. So you might say black and white. Okay, so when I flip through these, hopefully they're all in sequential order. I can easily see black and white, and I can know what they all are. Okay, questions? Good. I'll come around and talk to you a little bit as we continue work. We have 45 more minutes left of class, so that should be enough time to complete it. But if you don't, you have till next Monday, so it'll be due on Monday. Yes.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes. Sure.
If you take this background layer and drag it down, here, move your mouse, and drag it down to this, it'll duplicate. You don't really ever want to work on your
Oh, yeah.
original background. And then you can click it and change the opacity so you can see the difference between the original and the one you're working on.
Yeah. Good.
So that's
point.
for every image, just get in the habit that that's the first thing you do.
So, just to embellish on that a little bit, yes, absolutely, good point. If you right click on, or I'm sorry, she was saying if you bring it down to new layer, right?
Mm-hmm.
That will duplicate your layer. So what that does is that allows you to just always have a copy of your original image. Okay, I think I actually talk about that in a lecture coming up, but that's good to say actually a little earlier on. Okay, so I can then turn off that first background layer. We just keep that because you never know if you accidentally do something to your photo. It's always good to have the old one to revert back to.
Well, you can kind of toggle between the two to see did I change something? What do I like the original?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think you also mentioned something about opacity. Also another good point. If you click on any of these adjustments that we've done, you'll notice up here on the right that it says opacity. Well, what that will actually do, if you do that to your background layer, yes, that will actually physically make it opaque. Okay? So you can see how that's actually literally making it more and more opaque until it's nothing. Okay? But if you go to one of our adjustment layers, for example, dodge and burn, if you want to reduce the intensity of something, maybe the dodge and burn is just a little too intense, you can actually reduce the opacity of that, and notice that my adjustment that I was making for my dodge and burn is slowly becoming more and more opaque. Okay? So that can help reduce the intensity of a lot of the adjustments relatively easily. All right? I'll probably randomly think of things all the time and just start talking about them and bring them up because there's so many things. I do forget about little things sometimes, so thank you for bringing things up, and I'll probably shout something out here in a little bit too. Yeah?
Are we allowed to make brightness and contrast adjustment before we start?
You can, sure.